Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with pork belly with celery root puree. That's right, do not let the unremarkable name fool you. This gorgeous fall appetizer was tremendously delicious, and pork belly is one of those things people see on TV. Maybe you've seen Bourdain waxing poetic about it traveling through Asia, or you saw one of those kids make it on Top Chef, you know, the one with the tattoos, and you thought to yourself, man, that looks good. I wonder what's up with that. I bet it's really hard to work with. No, it's incredibly easy, and this is how you do it. So first up, of course, we're going to need a piece of pork belly. And if you're thinking, man, that sure looks like bacon, there's a reason for that. This is the exact same piece of meat they make bacon with. So we got that going for us. And we basically have two sides, kind of a meaty side and a fatty side. And speaking of the fatty side, please note the skin has been removed from this. Yes, there are some amazing things you can do with pork skin, but just not in this particular recipe. But anyway, we're going to take our piece of pork belly, sans skin, and we're going to season it up very generously with some kosher salt, a whole bunch of freshly ground black pepper, and a little touch of smoked paprika. It's just going to give it a hint of sweetness and a teensy tiny bit of smokiness in the background. And then once our pork belly has been salt, peppered, and paprika'd on both sides, we will begin the wrapping process. And you can just do this in foil, but what I'm going to do is start with a piece of parchment paper first. I want to kind of create an extra membrane around the pork before we wrap it in the aluminum. And actually, let me flip this over so the fat side's down. And once that's wrapped in the parchment, we will wrap this in not one, but two layers of aluminum foil. So we'll place that down, we'll wrap it in our first piece of foil. And generally, I do like using the heavy-duty foil here. But a couple pieces of regular foil will work perfectly. Oh, and one other thing. I generally like to end up with the fat side up, which I don't believe I did here. I think I lost track. Which really is no big deal, because pork belly is such a fatty piece of meat. But in general, when we roast things, we prefer the fattier stuff on top, so it can kind of self-baste. But like I said, that's not really a major factor here. And once we have that encased in parchment and wrapped in foil, we will place that in a heavy-duty roasting pan or baking dish, at which point it's ready for a very gentle, very slow roasting. Yes, slow and low, that is the tempo. So we're going to place this in a 200-degree oven and roast it for 5.5 hours. And we'll come back 5.5 hours later, take it out, and it's going to pretty much look exactly the same. And at this point, I would love to unwrap this and show you what it looks like, but we can't. Okay, you don't want to move on to the last steps of this recipe until the pork is cold. I guess theoretically you could use this now, but I think it's better if you follow this procedure. So we will let that cool on the stovetop for a couple hours, and then we'll pop it in the fridge, preferably overnight, at which point we'll pull it out and move on to the final steps. And because we cook this at such a low temperature, as we unwrap this, you're going to notice that pork did not shrink that much. Of course, you're going to see a little bit of that natural gelatin, and some fat, of course, but you really should not lose a lot of volume with that meat. And speaking of the fat, do not discard that. What we'll do is we'll use that to crisp this up. So save the fat, and then what we'll do is we'll take a knife and cut this into serving-sized pieces. And from a piece this big, you could probably get 6 or 8 portions. Because of the fat content, it's a very rich piece of meat, so a little bit goes a long way. And then once we have it portioned out, what we want to do is take a knife and score the fat side. Again, one side's going to be kind of meatier, one side's going to be kind of fattier. So take a knife and cut across about every 1/8 of an inch, cutting down about an 1/8 of an inch into the fat. And we'll go both directions. And that's going to help that surface crisp up. It's going to help some of that fat render out. And once that's done, you could just serve this whole piece as is. But I'm actually going to cut it into 3 smaller pieces. When it comes to crisping pork belly in a pan, surface area is your friend. And then this is up to you, but I do like to give it a little extra salt. So we'll season that up a little bit, at which point we'll head over to the stove, where I've melted a little bit of that reserved pork fat over medium heat, and we will place our pieces of pork belly fat side down. And I'm home alone, so I'm just going to do 1 serving. And basically, once this is heated through, and those surfaces are nicely caramelized, you're ready to serve. And one trick I love to do with that fat side down is place some kind of lightweight on top. Here I'm just using a big ramekin. You could use a pot or a pan, or a small plate, anything like that. And that weight's going to make that bottom surface get a little more crusty, push out a little more of that rendered fat, and we'll go ahead and turn that over, and you can see just how gorgeous that gets. And again, I'm on medium heat, but if you have to adjust that down a little bit, go ahead. And really the only rule is you have to cook that side. And as long as the meat's heated, you could serve it, but I really do like to make sure all the surfaces are browned. And then once I've gotten a little bit of color on those other sides, I do like to finish off with that scored fat side down. Give it a couple last minutes of crisping time, at which point we're pretty much ready to serve. So we'll transfer that onto some paper towel to drain for a minute while we set up our plate featuring celery root puree. And if you're not down with celery root, you're not down. It is amazingly delicious stuff. And basically all this is boiled and mashed celery root with a little bit of butter, which, by the way, I will show you in detail in our next video. So stay tuned for that. But I'm going to put a nice big swipe of that on the plate. We'll place down our pork belly. And then to finish this, believe it or not, I like to give it a tiny drizzle of extra virgin olive oil. I know we got pork fat. I know we got butter in the celery root. But I want to complete this unholy trinity of fats with a little bit of extra virgin olive oil. And then last but not least, a little more freshly ground black pepper. And that pork belly with celery root puree is done. And it's at these times I wish I had a larger vocabulary so I could adequately explain how amazing this is. I mean, the combination of that rich, fatty, crispy-edged pork with that earthy, subtly sweet, beautifully aromatic celery root, and like I said, that little bit of grassy, peppery hit from the oil, it's just an otherworldly combination. And unlike some pork belly recipes you see, we didn't cook this to death during the roasting process. I'm not trying to eat pulled pork here. I want this pork to be very tender, but not falling apart. All right, I want some toothsomeness to it, which is exactly what we have here. And believe me, I'd love to go on and on about how amazing this celery root is. But I don't want to steal my own thunder because, like I said, that's going to be the next video, so stay tuned for that. So basically, to summarize, I was absolutely thrilled with this. Sure, it took a while, but it was super easy, amazing textures and tastes, and I thought it looked like $1 million. I mean, come on, you Instagram this thing? Tell me your foodie friends aren't going to be totally jelly for your belly. You know they will. So I really do hope you give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy